Stop scrolling. What you are watching unfold between Iran and the United States right now is not a ceasefire. It has not been a ceasefire for weeks. And the word itself, the very fact that everyone keeps repeating it, is the trick. May 9th, 2026. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Navy issued one of the most dangerous single-sentence statements made by any government in this entire conflict. They told the United States that the next time an American destroyer fires on an Iranian tanker, the response will not be symbolic. It will be, and I am quoting them directly, a heavy assault on a U.S. base in the region. Not retaliation in international waters, not a missile fired into empty desert. A direct strike on American military installations in the Gulf. That sentence quietly reset the entire balance of power in the Middle East, and almost no major outlet treated it as the event it actually was, because what you are about to walk through is not breaking news. This is the architecture of a war that has already restarted, even though every official in Washington and Tehran is still pretending it has paused. And by the end of this, you will see why the gap between what is being announced from podiums and what is actually happening in the Strait of Hormuz is one of the most dangerous gaps in modern strategic history. Stay with me, because there is a single document filed in an Iranian port that makes the rest of this fall into place. And almost no one has reported on it. There are three things happening right now that mainstream coverage will not connect for you. Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz. The United States controls Iranian ports. Both sides are firing at each other almost every week. And both sides are calling this a ceasefire. The framework you need to hold this in your head is something military strategists call a dual-blockade. And The Guardian used that exact phrase to describe what is happening as of April 24th, 2026. It is the only term that captures the truth. Two countries strangling each other in slow motion while their diplomats sit at a table pretending the strangulation is not happening. Now hold this number, 20 million barrels per day. According to public energy data, that is how much oil normally moves through the Strait of Hormuz, close to 20% of the entire planet's oil supply. Right now, that flow is a fraction of normal. The International Energy Agency has already characterized this as the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. And by the time we are done, you will understand exactly how a single warning from an Iranian admiral on May 9th could push that disruption from large to total. You will also understand why the man who used the phrase heavy assault knew exactly what those two words would do to the price of every barrel of crude on the planet within minutes. What follows is what your news cycle will not put together for you. Pull the camera back. February 28th, 2026. The United States and Israel launched the opening strikes of what is now being called the 2026 Iran War. That is the official starting date in the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas analysis, which has been tracking the economic shock of this conflict in real time. Within days, Iran did the one thing every strategic planner in Washington had been told for 2 decades it could not afford to do. Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, not partially, not symbolically, functionally. March 4th, 2026. Brent crude surged past $120 a barrel within 72 hours of the closure. Qatar Energy declared force majeure on every contract it had. By March 12th, the combined oil production of Kuwait, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE had dropped by at least 10 million barrels per day. This is the number that matters. 10 million barrels vanished from a global market that runs on roughly 100 million. That is 1 out of every 10 barrels the planet was relying on, gone in less than 2 weeks. Now pay very close attention to the next move, because this is the move that almost no one outside the Pentagon and Tehran fully understood at the time. The United States did not simply respond by trying to clear the strait. The United States imposed its own blockade, a counter-blockade, sealing Iranian ports from April 13th onward. 2 blockades, 1 waterway. And inside that dual chokehold, a ceasefire was announced on April 16th, brokered by Pakistan and personally credited by the Trump administration, on paper. But the moment that ceasefire was signed, something quietly began that almost no one is connecting to the headlines now. It is the reason every clash since has been more dangerous than the one before it. And it is the reason that the Iranian warning on May 9th was not bluster. It was a contractual threat built on a structure that had already been put in place. And here is what should genuinely unsettle anyone watching this from a distance. The ceasefire was not designed to end the war. It was designed to do something else entirely. And the proof of that is sitting inside a single registry document filed in Bandar Abbas that almost no one in the Western press has reported on. Stay with me. On April 13th, just days before the ceasefire was signed, Iran did something no one in Washington had publicly considered. It created a government agency. The agency has a name, and the name matters. The Persian Gulf Strait Authority. Lloyd's List Intelligence, the shipping data company that has been tracking global shipping for over 2 centuries, was the first to report it. The job of this authority is simple and absolutely unprecedented. It vets every commercial vessel that wants to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, and it charges that vessel a toll. Reporting from multiple international outlets places that toll at over $1 million per ship. Read that sentence again. Iran is not blocking the strait anymore. Iran is taxing it. And here is what that quietly means. The country that the United States insisted for 40 years could not be allowed to dominate this waterway has, in the middle of a ceasefire, formalized its dominance of it. Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State, called the new authority unacceptable. That was on May 8, 2026. And the next day, the United States fired on 2 Iranian tankers attempting to break the American blockade, which is the precise moment when Iran issued the heavy assault warning. The timeline is not random. The timeline is a chain. Now connect this to where you live. The average price of a gallon of gasoline in the United States, as of May 2026, sits well over $1 higher than it did at this point last year. CNN's economic reporting that week made that comparison explicitly. For an American household driving an average of 15,000 miles a year in a vehicle that averages 25 miles per gallon, that is roughly $600 additional a year going straight out the door on a single line item. And gasoline is the visible cost. The invisible costs are bigger. Kevin Hassett, the director of the U.S. National Economic Council, admitted on Fox News Sunday Morning Futures on May 10, 2026, that consumers and businesses will be paying higher prices, in his words, in the short run because of the Iran war. His framing was that this is temporary. The framing was deliberately reassuring. But here is what the Dallas Fed's own modeling, published in March of this year, actually projected. If the closure of the Strait of Hormuz persists into the second quarter of 2026, which is exactly where we are sitting right now, global real GDP growth drops by an annualized 2.9 percentage points. That is not a rounding error. That is the difference between a global economy that grows and a global economy that stalls. And the Dallas Fed went further. If the closure lasts as long as the 1973 oil supply disruption, 3 quarters, there is only a 58% probability of the strait remaining navigable for normal commercial traffic. Coin flip odds on 20% of the world's oil. Now here is the part nobody on cable news is putting together. The conflict has spread. Israel and Hezbollah have been exchanging fire across the Lebanese border for weeks, despite a separate ceasefire announced on the same day in April. The UAE has reported intercepting 550 ballistic missiles, nearly 30 cruise missiles, and over 2,200 drones since fighting began in February. 550 ballistic missiles is not a regional skirmish. That is the airspace of a sustained war. Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, all have reported intercepts or impacts on their soil during what the world's most powerful country is still calling a ceasefire. And here is the counterintuitive statistic that you should hold on to, because it tells you what kind of moment this actually is. As of May 11, 2026, in an on-camera statement to reporters, President Donald Trump described the ceasefire with Iran as being on, and these are his exact words, massive life support. That is the President of the United States on the record, telling the country that the agreement keeping the world's most dangerous waterway from going fully closed is barely alive. Now think about who that statement was for. It was not a warning to Tehran. Tehran already knows the agreement is dying. It was a warning to the American public, dressed as a statement of fact. And here is what most analysts watching this fail to register. For Iran, every additional week of this ceasefire is a strategic win. The Persian Gulf Strait Authority is collecting tolls. The blockade narrative is consolidating. Iran's allies in Lebanon and Iraq are being supplied. The Iranian leadership is buying time to dilute its enriched uranium stockpile, which it offered to do on May 11th, as confirmed by 2 regional officials involved in the negotiations. For the United States, every additional week is a slow loss. The blockade is expensive. The Gulf states are under fire. Allies in Europe and Asia are paying higher energy prices and asking questions. And the President of the United States is, for the first time in modern memory, about to fly to Beijing to ask the Chinese government for help managing a Middle Eastern crisis. That brings us to the question nobody in mainstream coverage is willing to ask out loud. Now take a deep breath before I walk you through this next part. Because here is where this conflict stops being a Middle Eastern story and becomes a story about every economy on Earth connected to a port, which is to say, including the one you are sitting in right now. The worst case here is not a regional war. The worst case is a closure of the Strait of Hormuz that the United States cannot reopen on a usable timeline. Goldman Sachs, going back to its analyst notes, modeled a scenario where Brent crude touches $110 per barrel under partial blockade conditions. Brent crude has already touched $120 in this conflict. The earlier models are now floor estimates, not ceiling estimates. And here's where geography starts to dictate politics. The Strait of Hormuz is 34 miles wide at its narrowest. The shipping lanes inside that channel, the actual usable transit, are far narrower than that. According to the World Economic Forum's Global Risks Report 2026, geoeconomic confrontation at choke points like this is now the single biggest driver of economic and industrial policy on the planet. Translate that out of analyst language. The people who decide where factories get built and which countries get to industrialize are now making those decisions based on whether ships can move through a piece of water roughly the width of a mid-sized American county. Strategic planners assess the probability of a full breakdown of the current ceasefire, leading to renewed direct combat operations between the US and Iran at somewhere between 30 and 50% on current trajectories. That number has been rising every week the standoff continues. And it is not static, it compounds with each tanker strike, each Hezbollah drone over northern Israel, each UAE missile interception. Now I need to pause here because something deserves a full stop. The 2026 Strait of Hormuz crisis has already, according to public reporting from multiple sources, resulted in at least one tugboat sunk, at least 17 merchant ships damaged, 12 seafarers killed or missing, and a port worker killed in Bahrain. Those are people. Crew members on commercial vessels, workers on docks, people with families who have not been told what their loved ones were really doing in a strait that was supposed to be an ordinary shipping lane. Those figures sit behind every calculation, every probability, every policy decision that follows. They are not statistics. They are the reason any of this analysis matters at all. Every student of military history knows the pattern that is unfolding here. The Gulf of Tonkin, the 1973 Yom Kippur oil shock, the Cuban Missile Crisis, every single one of those events shared one common signature: a choke point, an embargo or blockade, and a great power that misjudged how far the smaller power was willing to go. The 1973 oil disruption lasted 3 quarters, and it triggered the worst economic decade in American post-war history. The current disruption is now in its 3rd month. The Dallas Fed has explicitly framed it as the 1973 parallel. Now look at the gap, because this gap is the structural signature of where this is going. The official announcement from Washington is that the ceasefire is holding. The observable reality is that the United States struck 2 Iranian tankers on May 8th. The second observable reality is that Iran issued a heavy assault warning the next day. The third observable reality is that the UAE was hit by Iranian drones and missiles on May 4th and May 5th. That gap between the announced stability and the continuing exchange of fire is not a messaging problem. It is the structural signature of a ceasefire that exists only on paper. It is the structural signature of a war that has not stopped. And there is one more layer to all of this. The layer that strategic planners actually lose sleep over: China. President Trump has, as of mid-May 2026, scheduled a trip to Beijing to ask President Xi Jinping to pressure Iran into concessions. That sentence, said out loud, contains the entire story of how American power has changed in this decade. The country that for 40 years was the unquestioned guarantor of free passage through the Strait of Hormuz is now traveling to Beijing to ask the People's Republic of China for help unsticking it. The historian Niall Ferguson wrote years ago that empires do not end with a single battle. They end when other powers stop expecting them to solve problems, and the empire itself starts asking those powers for help. That sentence was theoretical when he wrote it. It is now a flight itinerary. And here is the final piece of the puzzle that almost no analyst is willing to say plainly. Iran has been preparing for this exact scenario, a slow, controlled chokehold conducted under the cover of a ceasefire, for the better part of 2 decades. Every move you are watching, from the Persian Gulf Strait Authority to the toll structure to the diluted uranium offer, was wargamed long before February 28th of this year. What looks like chaos on a cable news ticker is, on the ground in Tehran, a strategy that is performing almost exactly as designed. Step back from the specifics for a moment, because here is what all of this, the tankers, the tolls, the Beijing flight, the heavy assault warning, actually means for anyone living in an economy connected to a port, which is to say, everyone watching this. What I want you to take from this is not fear. Fear is not useful. Panic does not help anyone navigate what is coming. What is useful is the map. Because when you understand the structure, when you see that this is a dual blockade, not a ceasefire, and you know what a dual blockade does to global oil supply over a sustained period, you can see what is coming before the headline announces it. Now let me give the counter-argument a fair hearing. Because serious people with serious credentials look at exactly the same facts and land somewhere much calmer. Their argument runs like this: Iran cannot afford a wider war. Its economy is collapsing under sanctions and the cost of the blockade. Its proxy network has been significantly degraded over the past 2 years. The Trump administration in this reading is using maximum pressure precisely because the math is in America's favor, and a peace deal is, on balance, more likely than escalation. That argument is not wrong. Iran's economic position is genuinely terrible. The strategic logic for de-escalation on both sides is real. And the Iranian counter-proposal of May 11th, which included an offer to dilute its highly enriched uranium and transport the remainder to a third country, is a meaningful concession, not a token one. So the honest picture, stripped of both the panic and the complacency, is this: the probability of resolution exists, the probability of escalation exists, and the side with more incentive to keep firing at this exact moment is whichever side believes the other will blink first. Here is what to actually watch, because 3 specific data points will tell you which direction this resolves before any headline announces it. First, watch the Strait of Hormuz tanker traffic numbers, which Lloyd's List publishes weekly. If those numbers start climbing back toward pre-war levels, a quiet deal has been reached behind the public statements. Second, watch Brent crude. A sustained move above $125 per barrel signals that the futures market is pricing in a full closure. A sustained drop below $90 signals the opposite. Third, watch Beijing. If President Xi publicly involves himself in the negotiations, the de-escalation track is real. If the response is silence or a vague communique, the escalation track is locked in. Those 3 signals, the Strait, the price, and the city of Beijing, will tell you everything before the cable news anchors do. And to anyone watching this who has been told for years that the Middle East story does not affect you because you live thousands of miles away, this is the moment to set that idea down. Because the gallon of gas in your tank, the price of the food on your shelf, the interest rate on the mortgage you are trying to refinance, all of those are now downstream of decisions being made by an Iranian admiral, an American president, and a Chinese leader on 3 different continents. The future belongs to the people who can see those connections clearly. Wars almost never start because everyone wanted one. They start because nobody watched the dominoes fall until it was too late. Now you know.